You're going to see a lot more of this man in the next 4 years, Taiwan's new president, Lai Ching-te. He's won himself one of the toughest jobs in the world, keeping Taiwan safe from Chinese attack.
然而，面对中国的文攻武吓，我也有守护台湾的决心。
That intimidation has intensified in recent years, yet voters defied it, choosing Lai as their next leader. It's a slap in the face for Beijing. Lai once even said that he's for independence for Taiwan, something that in China's eyes makes him and those around him separatist criminals.
They are put Taiwanese future in danger, so they are be the enemy of our Chinese nation.
Now, in his election campaign, Lai stressed that there's no need for Taiwan to declare independence because it's effectively independent already. But even that, of course, is not what China wants to hear. And its President Xi Jinping has repeatedly made clear that he reserves the right to invade Taiwan. And the trouble for Taiwan is that it's not ready to defend itself.
I think Taiwan's behavior in this context verges on the suicidal because Taiwan is voting for candidates whom Beijing has made very clear it regards as a serious provocation, fairly or not. And at the same time, Taiwan is not really doing anything near what it would need to do to make itself more defensible. In part 1 of this video, we'll find out why Taiwan is looking so dangerously exposed and what it needs to do to boost its defenses.
It's to make sure that as China becomes more militarily capable and as the military balance of power continues to skew in its favor, that it continues to see clearly the costs of a potential military assault.
We'll hear from the former head of Taiwan's military, who says politicians have been spending too much on weapons that are prestigious but would prove useless in a conflict.
It spends a lot of money and will be easily destroyed from the long distance.
And we'll see how pressure looks set to mount from the US for Taiwan to take its defense more seriously, especially from conservatives who could soon be calling the shots.
The United States, at the end of the day, is going to help those who help themselves. I mean, that's only rational and reasonable.
Taiwan's new president is like a red rag to China, but his election was double-edged. Lai only won 40% of the vote in a three-way race, and both his opponents had called for reaching out to China. That means that Taiwan's new leader is under pressure not just to boost Taiwan's defenses, but to try to find a way back to dialogue with China too, something that's been deadlocked for years. In part 2, we'll find out just how tough it would be to overcome that.
If Lai not recognize the One China principle, I don't think we can dialogue with him.
It's really hard for a democracy to deal with a non-democracy, and that's the situation we are facing right now.
And in part 3, we'll look at some wild cards that have the potential to mess up any plans that Taiwan's new leaders might make in its fractured new parliament.
The very fact that Taiwan political system becomes more pluralistic can mean that there will become more avenues of access for Beijing to seek to engage in and influence political debates.
And we'll zoom out to the global stage to see how Taiwan could find itself competing with Ukraine for American support.
I think Taiwan is much more important than the Ukraine for the United States. If Taiwan is taken by China, that means that China will dominate Asia.
You can see just how high the stakes are, not just for Taiwan, but for both the world's superpowers, and for Ukraine and Europe and much more besides. But this is a story that begins in Taiwan, with the question of whether it's ready to fight. It's a few days before Taiwan's elections, and we've come to interview a former president. Ma Ying-jeou is an elder statesman of the Taiwanese opposition, a man proud of building bridges with China. What he told us would dominate the final days of the campaign. We asked Ma about how to deter China from invading. Listen to what he said.
No matter how much you defend yourself, you can never fight a war with the mainland. You can never win. They're too large, too much stronger than us.
That idea that there's pretty much nothing that Taiwan's military can do to deter China from attacking, well, that caused a sensation. Many commentators slammed it as dangerously defeatist. Lai Ching-te seized on the remarks, saying that he was all about peace through strength. In fact, all the main parties were at pains to acknowledge that Taiwan needs a strong defense. The question is, how serious are they about that? It's no wonder this is an issue. China has ramped up military pressure in recent years, trying to intimidate Taiwan's people into accepting an inevitable reunification. It doesn't seem to be working.
The more heavily that Beijing leans into sticks, into threats, military activities, economic coercion, the more that the Taiwanese population will be skeptical of Beijing's intentions and will not want to unify with China. So in a way, this is a broken approach on the part of Beijing.
Taiwan might be resisting Chinese pressure, but it is not ready for war. Here's a man who can tell you why. Hsi-min is a former head of Taiwan's military. He's frustrated by what he sees as a dangerous lack of progress.
I think that we still have a long way to go to establish the credible capability.
Li says Taiwan's politicians are too attached to outdated thinking on defense, spending limited funds on big-ticket weapons that would be little use in a war with China.
We only rely on this kind of warships, big warships, fighter jets, and the tanks. Not the effective anymore because it spends a lot of money and it's highly on the fixed base like airfields, seaports, or fixed radar installation. It will be easily destroyed from the long distance.
In Europe, the Ukraine war has showcased a different approach, asymmetric warfare, an effective way of fighting a more powerful invader.
An asymmetric strategy essentially acknowledges that, in contrast to the mainland, Taiwan has much fewer resources that it can work with when it's building up its military capabilities, when it's designing its military strategy, meaning that it should be procuring a bunch of smaller military systems that are mobile, survivable, but also expendable, so that it can hold down the fort in the event of an invasion, so that it gives the US time to intervene.
Taiwan needs that kind of the anti-ship missiles, but we also need the sea mines, and we also need mobile, highly survivable air defense system. We need a lot of drones, AI-enhanced attacking drone, but also the system like the Javelin or Stinger that's a lot used in the Ukraine war.
It sounds like a long list, but that's only part of it. Admiral Li says that making Taiwan ready to fight is a much bigger project.
First one, we have to develop the asymmetrical capability. Second one, we should have a well-trained troops. Third is we should have a will to defend ourselves. Finally, we should develop the resilient society.
Taiwan is already making some moves, extending compulsory military service for men from 4 months to a year. But Hsi-min would go further still, with an idea that reaches deeper into Taiwanese society, a territorial defense force based on volunteers.
I say, if you don't have to join the military in the long term, but if you can be a volunteer to become the territorial defense forces, we mobilize you maybe two times a year. You have your own job. We give you a short period of training how to fight with the decentralized operation and we give you the asymmetrical small arms. This become the part of the military.
Hsi-min says he thinks this could become a force of 200,000, a major boost to Taiwan's regular military. It would be all about resisting a Chinese attack until the US came to help. But that raises the next question. Can Taiwan count on America to show up?
That's the commitment we made.
Joe Biden has said on multiple occasions that he would defend Taiwan if China attacked. But the US has a lot of other things on its plate, like supporting Ukraine and Israel. And recent polling suggests the Taiwanese people are losing confidence in America. In fact, US weapons supplies for Taiwan are already coming under strain, with billions of dollars of orders stuck in a backlog. Now, with an election approaching and the strong chance of Donald Trump returning to the White House, US policy towards the region could enter an unpredictable phase. Elbridge Colby served in the Pentagon under Trump and masterminded his national defense strategy.
I think any future Republican administration is going to put China at the top of the priority list. I mean, if you look at President Trump's administration, that was the major historic shift that he initiated and his administration initiated was a more tougher line on China.
But Colby adds that for that to translate into more support for Taiwan, Taipei has to deliver.
From my point of view, Taiwan's behavior, this is a kind of a tough statement, but I think it's true, unfortunately. It borders on vaguely suicidal behavior because Taiwan is voting for candidates whom Beijing has made very clear it regards as a serious provocation, fairly or not. And at the same time, Taiwan is not really doing anything near what it would need to do to make itself more defensible. And the United States, at the end of the day, is going to help those who help themselves. I mean, that's only rational and reasonable, especially when you look at the mood in the United States is pretty anti-interventionist.
So where does Taiwan's new president, Lai Ching-te, stand on all this? We spoke to a leading figure in his DPP party.
It's very normal as what we see and what we see from Taipei and what we see from Washington, D.C. may differ. But I think the most important thing is that we all agree that to strengthen Taiwan's national defense ability is very important. And I think more and more people have realized that, especially after the Ukrainian and Russian war, asymmetric weapons might be very useful.
So Lai's team is on message about asymmetric warfare. And Lai has a crucial channel to the US right by his side. Vice President Hsi-min Kim served as Taiwan's emissary to Washington for several years.
We value the relations with the United States very much, so this is why, also part of the reasons why he chose Kim Xiao as his running mate. And she has been developing a very, very good relations with Washington, D.C. I think this will be very useful in the next 4 years and even next 8 years.
But there are still reasons why the new government might stop short of a full commitment to an asymmetric strategy.
For many Taiwanese, the most pressing threat isn't necessarily a full amphibious invasion by China. The most pressing threat are the day-to-day incursions that they are dealing with from Chinese military planes and ships, which have reached a new level of frequency and intensity. And so Taiwan has a challenging set of requirements to face.
Plus, in terms of defense spending, Lai has talked about aiming for 3% of Taiwan's GDP. That's roughly the level of the US, but it's well below that of Israel, a country also facing existential threats, and it might not be enough to satisfy a future Trump White House.
I think 3% is woefully inadequate. I would say 10% would be. I mean, I don't think there's a particular figure, but Israel is actually much less threatened than Taiwan. There's no great power that's lusting after Israel.
You can see questions piling on questions, and there are even more to come. The new president will not have a majority in parliament, and parts of the opposition are skeptical about going all in on boosting Taiwan's defenses.
If slowing down a little bit more Taiwan's purchase of U.S. defense weaponry can mean that it gives Beijing more space and more off-ramp for Beijing, and thereby slowing down Beijing's military threat against Taiwan, then Taiwan, according to that logic, can have its defense and stability without spending money on buying weapons. Sounds like almost the best of both worlds, and it's cheaper too. So I think that argument, you will see a number of legislators on the opposition side pursuing it.
This will make managing parliament absolutely crucial for the new president. We'll have more on how that's going to be tricky later, and how the ambiguous result of this year's election could throw up major surprises. Taiwan's voters seem to be saying to Lai, "You're our choice, but try to get on with China." So in part 2 we ask, does Lai have options besides boosting Taiwan's defense? Can he reach out to China in some way, even manage to calm things down? You remember our interview with Taiwan's former President Ma, which was so controversial, where he said Taiwan could never defend itself against China. Well, he said something else which caused an even bigger outcry. Here's the background. Ma has long been a major advocate of dialogue with China. He even met Xi Jinping in 2015. No other Taiwanese leader had ever done anything like it. So we asked Ma, could Taiwan work with Xi again? Could it even trust him?
So you think you can trust him?
Well, as far as cross relations, you have to.
This was an even bigger bombshell than what Ma had said about defense. This idea that Taiwan should trust Xi Jinping despite all of his threats. It exposed a debate about how far Taiwan could try to engage with China and seek ways to calm tensions down. In this January's election, both opposition candidates running for president called for de-escalating tensions with Beijing. Between them, they won about 60% of the vote. Speaking at his victory event, Lai Ching-te did acknowledge this. He insisted that despite his tough stance, he was ready to talk to China.
用交流取代围堵，对话取代对抗，自信地和中国展开交流合作，增进两岸人民的福祉，达到和平共荣的目标。
This was Lai saying, it's not my fault that we can't talk with China. They're the ones stonewalling us. And he had a point.
Beijing's position, which has always been consistent, is that dialogue can only occur after the political party or political leader upholds the 1992 consensus.
The 1992 consensus? Okay, so we're diving into a bit of really deep detail here about the relationship between Taiwan and China. This is complicated, it's disputed, and it's even a bit weird. But it is revealing about just how tangled the conflict between the two sides is. Amanda Xiao breaks it down for us.
So the 1992 consensus was an understanding that was reached between Beijing and the then ruling government, ruling party, the KMT, in 1992.
That's from before Taiwan even became a democracy.
Within that understanding, the two sides agreed that there was only one China in the world, and that there would be left respective interpretations of what one China means. So for the KMT, one China means the Republic of China, i.e. Taiwan. From Beijing's perspective, of course, one China is the People's Republic of China, sitting in Beijing.
So the idea was that both sides agree that there's one China, but that they don't agree about what that means, or who should be in charge. Agree to disagree, if you like. But here's the thing, even that was disputed.
An important thing to note here is that this agreement, or this understanding, actually, was never written down or signed by the two parties, and Beijing never explicitly accepted the second part of that understanding, which is that there are respective interpretations.
So that means that there's not even agreement about whether this is an agree to disagree situation, or whether at the end of the day, China is saying, we're destined to reunify with us in charge, accept it. Here's what a Chinese expert said to us.
So China is a trinity of the country, nation, and state. So that's our tradition. And that's the reality. When the Taiwanese know the whole story, know the long history of China, know about the US, the West cannot be reliable. It's like maybe in the future of other examples can show that Taiwan's future should be in the hands of all the Chinese and mainland Chinese and the Taiwanese. I think they can accept.
For Lai Ching-te and his party, this is a non-starter. And polling suggests that also applies to the majority in Taiwan.
There has never been a political market for the arrangement that China is proposing for unification, which is one country, two systems. There's never been an acceptance of this by the Taiwanese people.
Hong Kong's experience has had a chilling effect on Taiwan. China's notion of one country, two systems was supposed to preserve freedoms in Hong Kong for half a century. Now it's all gone up in smoke.
We have seen what happens in Hong Kong. We've seen that one country, two systems, even the promise that will keep 50 years has already been broken. So people in Taiwan have realized that the so-called one country, two systems simply will not work, whether in Hong Kong or in Taiwan.
And there are no signs of Xi Jinping improving his offer to Taiwan, or reconsidering his view of Lai Ching-te as a separatist. China's objections extend from Lai, in fact, to his vice president Xiao, who we heard about earlier. Xiao has an American mother and strong US connections.
She's very Americanized, actually, in the eyes of the mainland. So it's, the independence is from the blood. So that's the reason I think mainland Chinese don't like her.
China has even hit Xiao with sanctions.
The target is external intervention and some separation force in Taiwan. That's the reason we put Hsi-min, those guys, as the target of the sanctions, not the Taiwanese other politicians or the Taiwanese people. So they are put Taiwanese future in danger. So they will be the enemy of our Chinese nation.
So what does this all mean? Are all hopes of some sort of engagement between the new government and Beijing dead in the water? Amanda Xiao does point out that low-level engagement does continue, leftovers from an era of better relations.
There are in place over 20 cross-strait agreements between Taiwan and China on a variety of issues, ranging from notary services to law enforcement cooperation to tourism. Even though formal cross-strait dialogue has been frozen since 2016, those agreements still stand, and so there remains some space at this more functional working level for communications to increase and for cooperation to perhaps deepen.
One possibility is for some opening up of tourism between the two sides, but this is all quite low-level stuff. The question is there any chance of China softening its line on Taiwan? Xi Jinping has repeatedly said that what he calls reunification with Taiwan is inevitable, and that he reserves the right to use force to achieve that. We asked Chinese expert Wang Yiwei how Beijing feels this threat of invasion is appropriate.
So this is a deterrence. This is our sovereign's rights to keep the unity, integrity, and sovereignty of China. This is use of force. It's not to kill the Taiwanese people. No, it's want to deterrence the external forces, not interfere of our domestic affairs.
Amanda Xiao says there's no reason to expect any movement from China on what it sees as its most fundamental interest.
For Beijing, taking that threat off the table would be very dangerous because it would open up the possibility of Taiwan moving further down this independence path that they see them going down.
And Hsi-min says any hope of persuading Xi Jinping to change his approach is wishful thinking.
Xi Jinping already said that the unification of Taiwan is the historical inevitabilities, and it is part of his China dream. So no way that Taiwan just used different ways to engage with mainland China, so China will change their attitudes.
So let's pull everything together for a moment. In part one, we saw how Taiwan wants to improve its deterrence against a possible Chinese attack, but that it's struggling with how to do that. And then in part two, we saw that Taiwan also would like to engage with China, but that Beijing is stonewalling over preconditions. Well, now in part three, we're going to discover some wildcards that could scramble everything. Remember these guys? These were the opposition candidates in Taiwan's presidential election. There's Hou Yu-yi. He was running for the KMT, the party that ruled Taiwan as a dictatorship for decades before turning democratic. It's the same party as former President Ma, who said those controversial things in our interview. But there was also Ke Wen-je. Let's talk about him for a minute. Ke was a surgeon before he turned to politics and formed his own party, the TPP, or Taiwan People's Party, just a few years ago. He called for a pragmatic approach to China, but was vague about details. His campaign was mostly about making the economy work better for young people. We saw on the ground how he really inspired his supporters, with some of the biggest rallies in the days before the election. Ke finished in third place for president, but he could end up with way more power than you'd think. In this place, Taiwan's parliament. That's because of how the election played out on this legislative level. Ke's TPP party won only 8 seats in parliament out of more than 100, but neither of the top 2 parties got a majority. So those seats give Ke the balance of power. And he can use that power to help the government get things done, or block things he doesn't like. It gives him huge influence over all sorts of sensitive stuff.
If US were to sell a weapon system to Taiwan, for example, these are big ticket items, which will be challenging for the ruling party to pass legislation, including budget bill alone on their own. And they will be likely be needing TPP support. Just a few votes of difference can make the difference between whether Taiwan can pass or cannot pass significant defense cooperation bills.
So what about those weapons that would be needed to fight an asymmetric war against China? Ke and his party may have the ultimate say.
They will be the ones who are, quote-unquote, trying to watch out for the purse strings for little guys in Taiwan. They're going to be likely to be less gung-ho about spending budget on defense procurement, when they'll argue those same budgets should go to more bread and butter issues, maybe more school lunches for Taiwan's children, maybe a bit more money for welfare for the disabled or handicapped, for example. These are all arguments that they're likely to use, I think, as they go about slashing defense budgets.
That would make Ke and his party a highly attractive target for China.
Not try to make any judgment about political motivation or integrity of TPP as a political force per se, but to simply say that at this stage, TPP being the new kid on the block is relatively under-financed internal campaign financing, is probably still relatively embryonic in terms of personnel, talents, as well as just human networks, generally speaking. So I think there's a reason why Beijing will want to keep TPP high on its list of priorities when you think about how to create and exploit more openings in Taiwan politics.
Kuan-je insists he has no illusions about China and says Taiwan should stand up for its freedoms in any dealings with Beijing.
台湾的底线就是我们希望维持目前我们民主自由的政治体制和生活方式，这是台湾的底线。那我也知道你的底线是什么。那这在中间，我们试着去找到一个平衡点。
But Xi Jinping has every incentive to shift that equilibrium. China has long sought to influence Taiwanese politics, both out in the open and more covertly. This new situation in Parliament could offer it big opportunities. The prize could be not just hampering Taiwan's efforts to strengthen its defences, but undermining its relationship with the US at the same time. As we heard earlier, a future US administration might be unforgiving if Taiwan started to wobble on defense.
I think this is really important for people on Taiwan to understand, because I think Americans are not going to be prepared to lose a ton of people and money and reputational capital if Taiwan is indefensible, especially if there's a perception that Taiwan is not serious about its own defense. You don't want to end up like Ukraine. That is completely correct. The way to avoid ending up like Ukraine is to have the military capability that Hsi-min has been talking about.
Volodymyr Zelensky was hailed as a hero, but his cause has been sucked into the vortex of American politics. Taiwan's new president could face similar risks, especially because those asymmetric weapons that Taiwan will need from the US, they're exactly what Ukraine needs more of too, meaning Taiwan could find itself pulled deeper into debates about America's priorities. Hsi-min doesn't shy away from that.
In my point of view, I think Taiwan is much more important than Ukraine for the United States. Don't forget the Ukraine, they still have kind of a European country. They should work together with the Ukraine to defend the invasion from Russia. It's not the sole responsibility for the United States. If Taiwan is taken by China, then the United States will lose their credibility, and the other regional countries will not trust the United States anymore. That means that China will dominate Asia, and they can successfully push the U.S. military out of the West Pacific. Then it is very strong impact for the United States, much more stronger than the Ukraine.
Everything is so entangled with everything else. The US, China, Ukraine, Russia, knock-on effects for Europe, and at the heart of it all, Taiwan, facing threats that you can hardly fathom, and decisions that are almost too ominous to take. For Hsi-min, there's one simple lesson to hold on to.
God only helps those people who help themselves. If you don't have the will to defend, nobody will help you to defend you. That is the good attitude that Taiwan should have.
It's going to be up to Lai Ching-te to try to bring all this together, as he embarks on one of the toughest jobs in the world. This is a test of stamina for Taiwan, for China, and for the United States. And it's a test through not just 2024, but every year that follows, until maybe one of them runs out of steam. People here in Taiwan know that they have the most to lose.